What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of 7 Team's live pod, here to talk about patch 14.3 and what we've got going into it. This is a fairly large patch. Let's go. So, preamble, not much to talk about here. Nothing I want to bring up other than talking about how the last patch went very, very briefly and whatnot. So, yeah, last patch overall went pretty well. Targeting-wise, we had to do a few micro-patch fixes on pretty much day one. Those landed okay. Let's talk about bigger topics, though, which is first off, time to kill. So I made a very rambly, poorly architectured video 2 weeks ago about TTK. I should start scripting that more in the future, but whatever. Regardless, I spent some time yesterday looking at our data from 14.2 and comparing it to other historic patches. So looking at 12.9 and 12.10. 12.10 was a durability update. 12.19 and 12.20 was the anti-snowball patch, and 13.19, 13.20, and then 13.24 to now, which is 13.24 compared to 14.1 compared to 14.2. 13.24 is the last patch of the previous season. Anyway, TLDR, average time to kill across the game League of Legends is pretty much identical to 12.10 or 13.20 or 13.24. It's the same as 14.2. So we are back to where we were before the seasonal update as far as average time to kill, and that is specifically excising tanks from that calculation. This is getting rid of top and jungle tanks and saying, okay, across the rest of the roster, it's about, I think like on average, like it's like 1% more durable than back then, but whatever. Now, it's worth noting that that is still including the global class of supports that have gotten tankier, because tank supports have more gold, and enchanter and mage supports have a guaranteed 200 health on their item. But even just taking a specific snapshot, which is just marksman, right? This is a class that got the least disrupted. If you look at just marksman, they are identical. They are like 99.8 to 100.2% as durable. If you average all marksmen, they are the same. So, of course, mages, or AP users in general, are the outliers here. Even if you were an artillery mage like Ziggs, you used to build Seraph more often, Seraph used to have health on it. You used to build Shadowflame had health on it. You used to build Horizon Focus had health on it. So there are a slew of ranged AP users who, by being a higher level than marksmen, are already tankier than those champions anyway, but no longer build 200 health on Shadowflame, no longer get 300 health on Night Harvester. There is a definite sort of subset of AP champions that are squishier than before. This is especially true for AP assassins who are happy to go Lichbane into Storm Surge into New Shadowflame, and that's just going to be their build. That is fine. I think it is worth us cultivating a set of mid-sized AP champions. It's basically the old Night Harvester melee crew. I think there is some value in getting a subset of that champions, such as, I'm going to keep bringing up Gragas, to make them a little bit more durable. If it needs to be from base stats, that is fine. It has to be from kit updates, that is fine. It has to be from item updates, that is also okay. That is something that we will start to tackle as we've gotten the rest of the game into where it was before in time to kill. And then even then, we're going to go a little bit further, and we'll talk about that down the line. I will mention, though, that supports as an overall class, it's basically you queued support, but you're not literally Zyra or Brand. So it's enchanters and tanks. Chips that are like typically considered supports. I think Ivern is in this list as well. Just generically to say, hey, support type champions. Anyway, this is a class that is globally up around 4%. And there's some extreme outliers like Bard, who is up 11%. And for reference, 11% is the difference that 12.10 made on League of Legends. So it's like Bard got another durability patch because of how his builds have moved. Bard is probably too durable right now. We should work to unwind this to some degree. But regardless, there are certainly some... We're getting to the point where there are individual outliers here, but the game as a whole is actually back where it was, and then we can say, okay, well, we can take this and move where we want to go. But as far as people saying, oh, the game is just too bursty now, this is statistically not supported unless you are an Akali player. In which case, yeah, you're an assassin, you're squishier than before. And that's kind of okay. Again, outside of like about 10 champions, the game as a whole is about where it was before. So the subreddit can change its title from League of One-Shots because this is no longer true. Either way, this is not to be like, haha, we did it, whatever, but it's just to say that, hey, we might want to go lower, even further, lower in burst overall, but to say the game as a whole has moved in this direction. Okay. Talk about overall balance real quick. Obviously, there are some pretty substantial balance outliers. I wanted to bring up really briefly that by the end of 1324, if you merged all ranks of skill together, every champion except for one was between 47 and 53% win rate in their primary role. Primary meaning the one that people played the most. So, I mean, Yone, it's a coin flip if that was top or mid. Either way, he was above 47. But if that was Seraphine, that was Seraphine bot lane. Or no, sorry, that would be Seraphine support because we're looking at all ranks. If that was Ziggs, that was Ziggs bot lane. If that was Karthus, that was Karthus jungle. Regardless, either way, that's where we were before. I would like to get us back into that realm. I want to be very clear that there are some champions that I think deserve to sit at somewhere around 47, 48, and champions that deserve to sit around 52, 53. But again, want to compress back down to the plus or minus 3 that I think is pretty reasonable for the game. And there might even be further outliers there, but we are getting closer there, right? I don't think we have any 57s anymore, but again, there's still some work to be done. Absolutely. There's going to be plenty of seeing if champions are not in the right shape or overall space now that the season has dropped successfully and we kind of finished all the tuning. But like, hey, by the way, that's kind of talk about 14.4 and beyond is making sure that going now more toward individual champions, individual kits, of which there's only so much time to do, but still trying to take the most important ones and make sure that, you know, we place each champion into the right place. If that's a champion gets a full 2 weeks of work or champion gets 2 days of work or whatever, we're going to start going more individualized in terms of like, okay, we're going to start building more individual, I don't want to say kit updates, but just like spending more than just a couple hours on a buff or a nerf and kind of moving in. Because a lot of it has been just trying to tune the systems and champions now that a bunch of stuff has moved around, right? Like Singed might just be okay with a 10% AP ratio nerf on Q, but some champs might need more than this, right? So let's move forward though. Let's talk about what's going into this patch itself. And first up, there are a pretty large set of system changes. So up first, we are taking another swing at burst damage. Now, to be clear, this initially spawned before 14.2 had ever landed. So we're still in the middle of 14.1, and we knew that burst was up globally in League of Legends. Tanks were more durable, fighters were pretty close, and then otherwise, the game was clearly burstier. Now, before we ever locked this patch, we got the data. I looked at it, and my boss also looked at his own version of it. And essentially, it's like, okay, yeah, we generically have time to kill back where it was. That said, I'm really keen in trying to lower burst even further. One anecdote I have. No, I did not verify this personally, but this is someone else told me this, so I'm going to take it as true, which is that player survey results for matchmaking quality improved on patch 12.10. 12.10 is the durability update, which basically makes me believe that if the game is less bursty, you have more room to outplay and feel like you're better than your opponent. Now, of course, we have to be careful that assassins are still viable, of course, right? This is a class that we know players are frustrated to fight against, but also we are committed to make sure assassins are a viable class of champ to play in League of Legends. All which to say that we'll keep those guys in mind, but let's try a league with even less burst, statistically, on average, than 12.10. And so there is a large reduction in burst damage. And the overall, I will say large, whatever. The overall point here is to lower basically, the razor here is when you click Death Recap and you look at damage sources, to have the tick that says items be a smaller percentage of the reason you died. This is kind of interesting because no matter how much of, let's say, Storm Surge's power comes from the unique passive versus the ability power and the magic pen, technically that item is giving you the damage. But when it gives you flat pen and ability power, you're like, you made Akali's kit stronger. When it's the Storm Surge proc, you're like, this item did all the damage. Even though Akali's kit was getting damage because of Storm Surge, the item. But that difference in looking at Death Recap is actually very meaningful. And I've thought that for a while, since before I joined the design team, but we're trying to take this more earnestly here, and we're saying, okay, let's try to really somewhat constrain the amount of damage coming from procs versus other places, coming from overall just increasing your kit. In general, it's probably not correct if champions are just vehicles for delivering items. I think it's generally better if you are always champion first. And there's some champions like Ezreal where his Q applies every effect under the sun, and you know that. And you're like, I'm playing Ezreal, whose Q is a spell and attack effect, and it's going to apply all these things. And you kind of opt into that on a very, very specific cadence, right? We know that Liandry's is really good on Brand and Lilia and Singed, and we know that these are champions who are functionally Liandry's applicators, but they still have to play their kit to be Liandry's applicators, whereas this is not just like, well, mash your keyboard and then be champion, and let you in the Storm Surge all the work for you, and it doesn't matter what you do, right? Like, there's degrees here, but this is just to say that we are, generally speaking, lowering the amount of proc damage in the game. And so it's most items that have some kind of instantaneous burst of damage are getting their numbers retuned. Typically, this is if the only thing your unique effect does, or like an explicit sort of like purpose of the item is, oh, the dot or the proc effect like really matters here, specifically against champions. We're generally going to make it scale lightly. So, for example, Luden's Tempest and Malignance are getting AP ratios that say it takes about 1,000 ability power to double the proc damage. That is clearly unrealistic unless you're playing Vagar, which means this proc damage will, on a normal build, slightly outscale magic resist growth on like an Udyr or something. But if he builds Merc Treads and then gets a Canic Recurrent, congratulations, your damage on their health bar is going to be lower than before, but whatever. But to say, okay, it's going to do slightly better than Keep Up, but the point of the item is it gives stats. It gives a surge in proc damage, but that will get eclipsed by people leveling up and gaining more health. This will get eclipsed by you getting more skill points into maxing your E and then your W and then your R. This will get eclipsed by you getting ability power that's going to feed into your other abilities. More strong is going to feed into this. This is explicitly saying that for many of these proc damages, they are not going to scale strongly. They will beat MR so that the tooltip, not tooltip damage, the tooltip damage of course will go up, but the damage over the health bar will go up unless they build a bunch of MR. And that is what we think is reasonable in almost all cases. The two exceptions here are Lichbane, where Lichbane just... Some of this is an appeal to history, but it being very mage-skewed feels pretty appropriate, so Lichbane's AP ratio is still very aggressive, and Storm Surge will have a relatively aggressive AP ratio as well, because for better or worse, this item has a very loud particle on it. It's a really cool particle. This is an item that players really, really like buying. It is still the most purchased item in League of Legends right now, and this means that dude made a really, really cool item that players want to buy. And so, yeah, we're going to balance this item around the proc being a large portion of the damage. That's just going to be true. It is the highest proc damage item that only requires you to land spells. That's just how it works. And we can balance around that because it's going to be the only one that really keeps going like this. And we're sort of able to commit to that. I think that's fine. So there's a whole lot of items here, but essentially... if you were Storm Razor, which is the AD crit item, that's only going to scale off AD. It's going to do a little bit more damage when you buy it in item 1. Actually, no, it's going to do a little bit less damage than when you buy it in item 1, but it's going to have more move speed on it. Static Shiv, the PvP damage will no longer scale with champion level, which will be a nice LeBlanc nerf, which is good, because it's no longer going to do 150 like PvP damage at level 18 or whatever. It's going to just sit at a flat 90 or whatever. I think it's at 90, but it's going to be 300 gold cheaper. And so for the average like Sivir enjoyer, this is a better item. Like 300 gold cheaper is a very, very meaningful buff because you can say this is a very good number of stats. The proc damage is going to help me wave clear. I can get it very early and have wave control pretty quickly. I'm not going to chunk people late game with this, but it's going to let me get into my build and get some wave clear, get some minion control, get some lane control, and we're going to go that way. That's meant to be a buff there. And just kind of down the line, there's a whole bunch of items that are getting changed. In the case of Sundered Sky, it's going minus AD plus health, and considering that the proc damage is percent total AD because it's a crit, that's actually like 17.5 damage off the proc, which is pretty meaningful. But some more health to keep the item pretty good overall, and just like that, there's a bunch of stuff going on here. So we should, if this all lands correctly, and I don't see why it wouldn't, this is going to be lower proc damage overall in League of Legends, and this means that more of champion power is going to come from their base kit. We'll see that some champs that were really, really tied to these systems, if they need a lot of help, then they can get that help. But overall, a pretty big swing here to move this kind of stuff around. Next, let's talk about the mage space. Actually, I'll put whatever, we'll just say it out loud. So we're moving things around in the mage space. We're buffing all 3 Lost Chapter items, which is Archangels, Ludens, and Malignants. These are all getting 100 gold cheaper. And I think in some cases, as compensation for the proc damage going down, which is in the case of Ludens and Malignants, they're getting a little extra ability power in some cases because these items are roughly balanced against one another. Like, they've each got an appropriate number of users. In some cases, people are under purchasing a couple of these things. Seraph's is a better item than people give credit for, I think. But some light buffs here. And again, there's going to be less proc damage. In the case of Ludens, the one item Dorn's Ring double stat shard damage is literally identical when you complete the item, but now it's cheaper and has more AP, so it's actually better than before. But then, of course, at 2 items, you have like a little bit less proc damage, but you're also 100 gold faster into your build with 5 more AP, so it's probably still not a weaker item. But it's like strictly better on item 1, and then it's like probably still a little bit better on item 2 if you like count total throughput, and then eventually it falls off, but like that's intentional that these procs are going to fall off over time. Similar kind of stuff to Malignance and whatnot, and Seraph's is just like actually just 100 gold cheaper, and that's it. Also, there is a small buff to Rod of Ages. Roa is getting 50 health and 100 mana. The 100 mana is just to say that the what I think should be a pretty assumed build in a lot of cases of going Roa Seraphs. The mana is there to give you 2 more ability power on Seraphs and 20 more on the shield when it pops. Also, just to keep it up with the same amount of mana as the other Lost Chapter items at 600. The 50 health is just the actual buff, and it's like, yeah, Rod of Ages is a little bit nicer now. It's back to 600 health, which to my recollection was how much health this item gave back in like 2010, which to me is just, I don't know, I like my 2010s, you know? I like my old school League of Legends, and I like looking back at those numbers. Regardless, of course, Roa is pretty inexpensive. It's clearly quite good, and this is basically just saying that, hey, if you are a melee mage, if you're a Galio or Gragas type, hey, consider going Roa. You are melee, you do want the durability. Of course, Rocket Belt can make sense to your champion as well. I'm pretty sure Galio loves Rocket Belt, of course, and that's fine. But to say that, hey, let's really try to make sure that the clearly durable mage items look clearly appropriate and enticing to the champs who would buy this. I don't expect Vel'Koz or Ziggs to build Roa. I think there's enough good alternatives, and they probably want ability haste, so they're not going to go for that one. But to say that, well, okay, why don't you try this one? I think is pretty reasonable. So some small changes there to the mage system to make sure that the non-lethality type options feel enticing and good. Next, a bunch of changes to, functionally the marksman space, so lethality, crit, non-hit. So Youmuu's is getting a ranged mod on the amount of out-of-combat move speed it gives, as well as a ranged mod on the active move speed. Youmuu's is just very clearly over on marksman. It's just clearly too good. Collector, when lethality became a flat stat, also clearly became too good on a bunch of marksmen. So this is our way of step 1 nerfing Neela and Misfortune, who are just over right now. They're just a little bit too good, and that's fine. There's a buffed Essence Reaver, 5 AD. This is just going to make it a more competitive option. Right now, its only users are Gangplank and Ezreal. This gives it a slightly more, slight more of an option to be maybe a Sivir option, maybe a Lucian option, maybe Corki wants to go for like this plus Quickblade as the build. This kind of space maybe is available in this case, but we don't expect that ever to be a very widely appealing item. We know that Sheen doesn't scale off of any of the other typical AD carry crit multipliers, but like neither does Energize, and people built a shit ton of Static Shiv and Stormrazor in the past. Sure, in some cases Stormrazor scaled off AD, but like we've had overpowered Static Shiv that never scaled off any AD carry stats, and it didn't scale off anything. So I think if you take a stance that ER will never be good because Sheen is never good, have you met all the Trinity Force users from the last season? Because there's plenty of champs that use like effects that don't scale, and that's fine. So I think much like this, ER will still be fairly niche. Like there's not a lot of AD carries that really use Sheen patterns, and that's okay. But there's going to be a few users here, and if people want to try it, this item should be viable. Of course, we know this is a direct Ezreal buff. There are going to be Ezreal nerfs in this patch to go alongside it, but regardless, that is going on. Static Shiv, as I mentioned, is losing some of its PvP proc damage. This item was just undertuned when 14.1 came out. Its passive is actually quite weak. Even currently, there is a limit to how much wave clear we're allowed to give you before it makes the game feel like like we've broken the game. There's a limit to how much PvP damage this Energize can do because there's not gameplay around it. So it actually is, like pound for pound, actually a fairly weak unique passive. That's just kind of true. But instead of just like having the most stats in the game, because that's kind of silly, we're just not going to charge you for the passive very much, and Shiv will be a very, very efficient item. If you price Kraken Slayers on hit damage as we price recurve bows on hit damage, Kraken Slayer is like 150% gold efficient. And that's very high, of course. But of course, you can't really say that's fair because it doesn't scale off of things like Hurricane. And of course, you can fail to get the proc damage by, not hitting someone 3 times. So that's not really a fair comparison on something like Kraken Slayer. But regardless, that item is a fairly appropriate marksman item that people occasionally skip and buy other stuff for, such as the Energized Lucian builds. But that's like roughly an appropriately powered item. And Static Shiv apparently needs to be at around that space as well, at 150-ish if we're going to count everything fully together. That seems to be where AD carry items are roughly tuned. I think crit is probably a slightly overpriced stat, and so just saying that every completed legendary is actually high efficiency because crit is probably actually too expensive. It doesn't really matter, right? At the end of the day, you just make printed items at the end of the day, and it doesn't matter what your made-up gold efficiency numbers are. Like, for example, the fact, like if you use the League Wiki to look at gold efficiency, the fact that there is a component for ability haste that is undertuned makes every haste item have extremely high gold efficiency because it's this component charges you 50 gold per ability haste. That is not what we actually consider ability haste to cost, but there is a weak component that builds into Warhammer and builds into all these other items. And of course, if you're just going to say, well, the cheapest component is what the gold stat's worth, it's like, well, you suddenly have really, really efficient haste items, which is fake, but doesn't matter, right? Again, this is to say that for the second time this year, gold efficiency is a really fake stat. It's a really, really fake stat. It's not terribly useful. I'll bring it up once in a while as like, hey, by the way, here's a number that you shouldn't really pay much attention to, but hey, by the way. Either way, direct buff to Shiv by it being 300 gold cheaper, and its proc, which already isn't very good, is getting a little bit lower, but who cares? Rageblade is getting plus 5 AD, plus 5 AP. Pretty small thing there, not much else to say. That item is, I think, just kind of weak. When Rageblade converted from the season before, it lost an intentionally strong mythic passive because there were no hybrid pen options. We then made a hybrid pen item called Terminus. I think the item is really cool. It is relatively well balanced. It's a pretty solid, not capstone, but pen item that works for marksman conventionally. And that meant that Rageblade lost a self synergy because crit conversion into on hit synergized with phantom hit. That no longer synergizes with phantom hit anymore. And it also lost a really, really OP mythic passive, or intentionally strong mythic passive, that these champions were balanced around. And so Rageblade kind of is a weak item. This is giving it a surge of stats to make sure it's a little bit better as a first or second item. It's probably still not a correct first item, but it'll be a little bit more competitive for people like Kog'Maw who just kind of want to belt on hits as fast as possible. Okay, great. Not much to talk about here. This might help, like, Kai'Sa get a Kraken Slayer Rageblade, like, evolve a little bit sooner on, like, the queue. There might be, like, a breakpoint here where it matters. I'm not really certain. Maybe if you, like, pick weird, I don't know, starting item or something. I'm not really sure. Regardless, though, it's, again, just a strict buff here. We'll always revisit as time goes on, which champions need help, of course, but that's there. Otherwise... yeah, there's other random stuff that's not meant to be really meaningfully power different. So Kraken Slayer is getting moved from an AD ratio and AP ratio to level scaling. That will bias it towards solo laners because they level up more than they, and like, you know, everyone earns gold about the same amount. The intent here is to be relatively power neutral on this item on average, but of course someone like Yasuo or Yone is going to gain more levels than like Ashe or something, and so they're going to gain more out of this. That's just going to happen. There's no way around that. That's okay. Yasuo and Yone building Kraken Slayer is pretty reasonable for those champions. What's nice about this is if you are a Hurricane user like Jinx or Kalista or Kog'Maw, Kraken Slayer gets a lot nicer because nothing on Kraken Slayer, the live version right now, scales with any stats on Hurricane aside from attack speed. And now, now doing a like Kraken Slayer into Rageblade into Hurricane build is like slightly better than before. Terminus only gave 40 AD. Cool, if that was one of your item slots, slightly better as well. So Wit's End, another one that gave you no raw AD. So Rageblade's going to fit a lot better. Sorry, Kraken is going to fit a lot better into on-hit item spaces. Regardless, the entire reason we're doing this at all, like it was initially kind of part of the proc damage stuff, but not really. Basically, I'm just trying to remove, so what I'm really trying to do here, and I headlined the stuff on a lot of the AD carry stuff here, was I am trying to delete gold ratios off of AD carry items as much as I can. ER still has it. I actually wanted to get rid of it on ER and was told no, it helps it stand out uniquely from IE, but I bet you one day I still get to delete it at some point on the bonus AD ratio, regardless, whatever. So the overall intended power curve for all this stuff, by the way, is better early, worse late, right? Static Shiv is the same item at level 8, except it's 300 gold cheaper. This item is strictly better early, and then, okay, late game, you're still 300 gold ahead, so you have an extra longsword, roughly, but the lightning damage is down 60 if you ever hit level 18, which, by the way, no AD carry actually hits in a real game of League of Legends. But, hey, theoretically, right? Whatever. Kraken Slayer no longer scales off bonus AD. So if you got ahead and snowballed and got your second item really early because you're 3-0, that's going to mean less. You know, if you're going to 6-item AD carry, that's going to mean less, right? The typical AD carry hits 18 before they hit 6 items, right? But it's intended to be, and the numbers do reinforce this, that like Static Shiv, much like Kraken Slayer, are better when you buy them, right? So the typical AD carry is, you know, like level 8 to 9 to maybe 10 when you finish your first item. And I did the math, and it's like, well, Doran's Blade, 1 stat shard because everyone runs AS, and Kraken Slayer is done, all right, and higher proc damage than before. So anyway, the TLDR is essentially that in basically all these cases, or I mean, not in the Yoma Selector cases, these items are getting nerfed, but in the crit space cases, and somewhat the on-hit space with Rageblade here, you will be a stronger champion at one item, but your champion will not gold scale their item purchases with more gold. They will provide you a standard strong effect. You will be more self-sufficient on item 1. Cool, great, congratulations. Over time, your extreme top end will go down. Other things I want to try are things like flattening out Bloodthirster. Maybe it's like a flat 25 or 30 AD, but still requiring the high health, but like it can be the first item that Draven buys. This could be shifting. Like, if Kraken Slayer is OP, I can just nerf its level 18 and, like, keep its one-item power spike if that's an acceptable level of power. This is opening up shield bow to be a slightly better second item to like feel reinforced and okay as a second item by moving the numbers around and making sure that it can feel pretty good. And if you want to skip IE to build shield bow, you can. That's fine. It's obviously going to be a power loss because of course it's not going to be as much damage as something else. But the thing I want to bring up in this space as well is I don't think AD carries lost a lot of power in the new season. Like, technically, yes, power did go down some, right? The IE build path lost a 5 AD mythic passive, and like IE itself is a 100 gold cheaper and lost 5 crit damage. But Kraken Slayer is unchanged, Shield Bow is basically unchanged, Bloodthirster is literally unchanged. LDR, like, the top, like, if you're hitting a literal Cho'Gath or Scion, it's worse, but like if you're hitting a normal tank, it's basically not different. Like there's a couple of like very small touches here where like, yes, technically Shiv is weaker and Stormrace is a little bit weaker than previous patch. And technically IE is a little bit weaker than previous patch. And y'all lost a 5 AD mythic passive. And then I'd ask you, go look at what like fighters lost. They lost the entire item Divine Sunderer, and Trinity Force lost a ton of stats off 3 full strikes going away, and like off 3 full strikes going away, and off of its mythic passive, which was like 3 AD, 3 move speed, and 3 ability haste, which is like a way better mythic passive than IE had. You look at like mages with Luden's Tempest, they lost 11 flat magic pen on 2 items from Luden's existing plus its mythic passive, right? Like I am pretty sure that AD carries like crit system specifically on hit lost more because of Rageblade. It had a real mythic passive, a very strong mythic passive, intentionally so. But like the actual crit system lost like 200 gold and 5 crit damage on like a full build basically. That's like, and then again the 5 AD for mythic passive, but again that's the weakest mythic passive in the game. So I like, you might be right that the overall crit system is weaker than it has been in the past, but every other system also went down. Pretty meaningfully so. Maybe tank items got better, but keep in mind like Sunfire itself got like directly nerfed, and it's still a competitive item that means it's competitive with other stuff. Like the, you know, Mythic Jackshow is gone, Mythic Radiant Virtue is gone, Mythic Heartsteel is nowhere near as good as it was before, right? Like Heartsteel got nerfed way the hell harder than IE did, if you're going to compare Mythics to Mythics, right? And then the Legendaries basically didn't move. So I don't believe that AD carries got, like crit AD carries got nerfed more than other classes. I do think on-hit champions did, specifically because of Rageblade, which we are hoping to rectify a little bit here. Though again, I think Curaminus is a pretty good item and we're not far off here. But I just don't believe that crit marksman got severely nerfed here. I don't think that's true. I think some of this was the absolute shell shock of I'm a sustained damage dealer and the game is as bursty as it's been in a really, really long time. That was true, right? I will totally believe you if you're like in 14-1, I literally can't play Jinx because Fizz one-shots me. Yes, that is an accurate statement. But since that point in time, Shield Bow's pick rate has roughly doubled, and overall time to kill in the game has gone back to where it was in 12-10 or 13-20 or 13-24, and I think being crit marksman, as of this patch, will be completely fine. So I do not agree with the Reddit comments that AD carries suck. I don't believe that's true. Okay. Canik Rookrun is getting a direct nerf here. Not much else to say except that Canik Rookrun is getting a nerf. This item is definitely very, very good. It is a cooldown nerf as well as a max health shield nerf. This item is strong. It might be a little bit too strong still. Is what it is. Worth pointing out that I am not sure what the correct answer here is in terms of items who their power is very skewed toward the resist. And like the, you know, magic damage shield is functionally resists in that world as well. What that means is when you buy it, you are not really protecting yourself against AD carries or fighters. That's interesting. I don't know if tank items are supposed to be pretty aggressively skewed against mages. In this case, of course it is. It's a very obviously anti-mage tank item. That's maybe okay. Either way, obviously this item is a little bit too good. It's getting nerfed. If that's getting nerfed again, we can do that. Holberg's getting a tiny buff. The passive that buffs cannon minions will now work if you are nearby your allies. That's probably always correct. Rite of Ages, I mentioned the buff earlier. Stridebreaker is getting moved into a Tiamat item, so it's going to have damage on the passive, basic Tiamat. It's going to have damage on the active, basic Tiamat. Its stat efficiency is going down. Its price is going up. Overall, it is going to be unique against Ravenous and Titanic Hydra and whatnot, so you can't get a bunch of proc, you know, button presses all at once. It's going to actually essentially have the lowest of any of the active damages on these items, but that's intentional. It has a slow attached. Then we have a whole bunch of champion changes in no particular order. Let's get into it. Ezreal gained more power than we wanted to give him in the previous patch. Also, Essence Reaver, which is now a core item of his, is getting buffed, and so it is reverting the Q damage ratio buff, it is reverting the R damage ratio buff, and then taking a little bit more flat damage off the R, so that Ezreal is a little bit less of a sort of burst mage kind of champion. I think we could take Ezreal's early game down a little bit more at some point. If we need to go after like his base AD or something, or a little bit of flat damage and early Q or something, we could. Regardless, we know he does currently have an early game power curve. We don't have to get rid of it, but he's certainly very good there. There's stuff we could do, but it's not crucially important. We just need to nerf him down a little bit because he's overshot and ER is getting buffed. Lilia is getting a very small tap to her passive damage. The ratio is not a lot of the heavy lifting here. It's going to be a little bit less passive damage down. People have more health, and so having more percent health damage could just go down a little bit. It's fine. Whatever. Q ratio is the primary nerf here. Q is mostly ratio, not a lot of base damage, and so this just moves her around to say, hey, actually, a little bit more of the rest of your kit's going to be relevant here, but Lilia is extremely, extremely too strong with all the recent changes. She certainly has items that really fit her. She likes when people have more health overall. She likes new Leandry. She likes Fruitmaker. She's very good, very mobile, very healy, but saying, okay, well, Lilia being mobile and being durable is a good thing right now. She gets to stand out from other champions by, being a fairly unique AP champion. We'll go after damage, and she'll still be mobile and pretty durable. Corki is somewhat of a reshape. The first thing is there's a bug fix. On live right now, Malignance's damage tick counts for Eclipse. Corki's primary build is Eclipse Malignance. That is clearly too good because it means landing one rocket triggers Malignance, which then triggers Eclipse. Eclipse has a fairly short cooldown, has pretty decent damage, gives him a shield as well. One rocket trigger Eclipse is clearly not expected gameplay, clearly not okay. That is his best build by far. That being nerfed by a lot is, of course, a meaningful amount of power down. So there's a couple of buffs to AP ratios to say that it's really just on Valkyrie right now. I guess I'll spend some time talking about this because I saw people talking about it online as well, which is I do think long-term, Corki should be a physical damage champion who builds AD like a normal marksman and doesn't have to go back to base every 5 minutes for package. I think those three things are correct for Corki that we should do in the next 2 months if we can get the time for it and nothing else is more urgent. I believe those three things should happen to Corki. That said, right now, Corki has a functional build, which is Malignance Rocket Poke. If you want to play him as Trinity Force or Essence Reaver, Manimune, and if you went ER, then Quick Blades, and if not, then Shojin. If you want to play that build and maybe like Eclipse no matter what, even without Malignance, or you play Malignance even with this bug fix or whatever, I think that is a functional build. Right, you can play AD Corki, and he's functional on, again, Triforce, Hexdrink, or whatever, and you have some rockets, they're decent, the AD ratio is actually pretty solid here, you have Gatling Gun, you play in mid-range sometimes, right, you try to stay, facing them, and so you get the health from Triforce, health from Shojin, and you're pretty happy with that one, and he's not like a bruiser, he's not like Urgot, but he's a marksman, and he's a little bit durable, and he has some poke, whatever. There's some validity there, it's a reasonable build, it's okay. If you want to play him as Malignance and Rocket Poke, it's not the most exciting build in the game, but also people are willing to play it, right? Like, Corki has, 6x'd his pick rate over the last month because people are like, oh, Eclipse Malignance is like a build, and I feel functional as, a poke champion, and I can do things. And so Corki existing at all is not a sin. Corki existing is a good thing. Of course, his bug fix is quite a bit of power down. And so there is a direct buff back because, hey, Malignance got weaker on Corki. And here's the thing, really. Because Corki is currently a magic damage dealing champion, this champion wants to build Void Staff. There is no other meaningful way to get Magic Pin in his build because there's no way in hell he's stacking Terminus. So this champion needs to build Void Staff for Crypt Bloom. And it's not Crypt Bloom because he can't build that much AP. So it has to be Void Staff. It's the only item he can buy. Unfortunately, he doesn't have any AP ratios. W's is bad. Packages is bad. Q's is pretty mediocre. Ours is intentionally bad so that you can't just play pure AP poke rockets. Your build falls off and just does nothing if you play pure AP poke rockets. That's intentional. That's how we kicked him out of Pro last time. All this to say that he at least has a functional build that people like playing that's not earning a huge ban rate. So Corki is much more popular, much more powerful, actually getting played, not getting much bans. Great. I would like for Corki to be viable. But in the current state of Corki, he is leaning toward building Void Staff. He wants to buy it 4th or 5th. And so for now, we have to embrace he has AP ratios. And this means that we can say, okay, well, it's not going to be the poke rockets. It's if you can go in and play aggressive Valkyrie, it's there. It's not a lot, don't get me wrong, but it's a nudge to say, hey, we know you have to build AP some. We know building Malignance is how you're actually having fun right now. Let's embrace that a little bit. For now, you get AP ratios. That is why I'm buffing AP ratios on Corki here. I think that makes sense. This is a lever that we kind of want to test out as a pro lever until we can do a kit update and like do things like delete package or something and make him into a physical damage champion, which I think are all good things. Corki is in a world where he's a very boring pro pick. He creates standoffs with package. He is a poke champion. Poke champions are often pretty boring in pro if they are not explosive enough. If you compare to like Nidalee javelins or Zoe stuff, Zoe actually does some pretty meaningful stuff in pro. Corki just whittles you down, which is a much less exciting poke pattern than those champions. It's functional in solo queue. People aren't annoyed by it, but it's a very boring pro pattern. And so we're trying to see if lower duration on holding package has a meaningful impact in pro play. If we're wrong, that's fine. We can move forward, but that's kind of all. It's like, hey, does this do anything? Trundle has, of course, been too good for too long. We're taking some flat health damage off of him, some flat damage off of his Q. Early game skewed nerf to Trundle. Wukong has been pretty weak for a while. We know he's been pro-jailed. The designer who's doing the balance updates to Wukong in this patch wants to do some larger scope patchwork in 14.4. I think it's a really good idea to do this. I think we have some really, really promising leads here of what to give, what to take to make Wukong not a pro-jailed champion. But he's like a 48% win rate jungler and like a 49% win rate top laner. He kind of sucks in both roles, and he still gets a little bit of pro play. Like, oof, this champion's in a really bad spot. Anyway, we're buffing him quite a bit right now. I think there's a really good chance he shows up in pro somewhat, but that's fine. It's not like Wukong being in pro at all is a problem. Obviously, this champion could get buffed, and so the primary change here is increasing the rank 1 through 4 range on Q. We could have made this flat 175. It still scales a little bit with rank, but not a bunch. E cooldown goes down with rank, and the AD ratio on Q goes up as well, so there's not a lot of AD ratios in the kit overall. Ultimately, we want to give 1.5-2% win rate to Wukong in the top lane, and then we are pretty confident, I think, that there is a pretty solid, pretty low scope up that we can do that puts Wukong in a pretty good spot. I think Wukong, by the way, should be able to sit at like 51.5, 52 in top lane generically, like somewhere around like Garen, and he would be totally fine. So he's relatively easy to play. He's like pretty approachable and appealing as a champion. So I think we can get him there, and he wouldn't set off any alarm bells. Be a pretty reasonable champion at that kind of power level. So we're gonna try to get him there and make him feel supported. Shyvana is currently okay as an AD build. If you're building like Trinity, Titanic, Sundered, that kind of stuff, you're fine. If you're building AP, she's really bad. She's another champion where she's melee and has Night Harvester. Turns out she really liked that. So there's some small stuff here. This is the AP ratio and the bonus attack speed on her Q, which will affect some clears, as well as just like when she builds Nashor's Tooth and she punches stuff, which again is largely clears, but you can be in combat sometimes. The bonus move speed on W has an AP ratio onto it. That's getting increased as well. It's AP ratio specific buffs, but also the attack speed is going to be used generically even by AD Shyvana. Zeri is getting some base AD and a substantial decrease to her early R cooldown. So I have held the theory for a while now that ulti cooldown is a very potent, ulti cooldown / ulti potency is a very, very strong pro lever. This is what I did when I made the last Vi update back in late 2023, where she was pro-jailed as like a 49% win rate jungler, and now she's like 51 and change and not pro-jailed. She's in pro, but like she's just healthy everywhere, and it was lowering the base value of R as much as I could to where it still felt like an ultimate, but it wasn't like, well, yeah, of course we wait for every ult cooldown and then someone gets one shot. It's like, no, you don't one shot anymore. The damage isn't there. But you are a sustained fighter and you're pretty durable, and that's fine. And you can, like, if you earn gold, you'll do a good job there. And it's like, yeah, actually, that works really, really well. And so my suggestion here, I spoke with the Don. I was like, here's what I think you should do. And he's like, that makes sense. Sure, let's do it. And then he came up with base AD. But was, yeah, let's bring the R cooldown as low as possible. I picked Master Yi as an example of a champion with a flat 85-second ult cooldown. And I'm like, that's probably about right for Zeri, where you're not going to buy haste, typically. I know she often buys quick blades. I know she's currently buying experimental hexplate. Both of those are wrong. She should build Infinity Edge and also should not be going hexplate at all. So there's a recommended update to get people off of hexplate. That item is not good on her. Stop doing it. But I understand why you would do it, because the ult cooldown is quite long, and being just a simple steroid, like it's not Ashe Arrow or Varus ult where it's like, oh, I press the button and a really big thing happens and I understand why I'm waiting for it. It's like, this is just kind of like how she's a functional champion in fights, and so this is bringing the cooldown quite low and saying you really shouldn't need haste. It should be up when you need it, and in solo queue, when you need it is like all the time, and in pro play, that's just going to sit on cooldown forever because they're waiting for the next dragon fight anyway. And so it's a really good way to give her solo queue power without pushing her too hard in pro. I think Zeri probably should have a somewhat flatter power curve now. I don't think Zeri should be one of the premier late game hyper carries. Like Aphelios, absolutely yes. I think that makes absolute sense here. I think Kog'Maw theoretically makes absolute sense here. Protect the Kog'Maw, not raise the happiness, that's something else, obviously, but like, Juggernaut type comps, like, yeah, he's the primary carry. And like, people get it when you play a whole team around Kog'Maw. It's like, yeah, this is what a champion does. Like, I understand he belts damage. Yeah, sure. Jinx somewhat, I think, is reasonable. Like, I know we had the Aphelios Jinx meta at MSI last year, and that wasn't great. I'm actually very happy that our AD carry meta in Pro is pretty aggressive right now. I want to retain that for now. But like, Zeri, like, just Zeri Yumi is the epitome of like, yeah, I don't really want to see that in Pro. And so if Zeri is not a hyper carry, but like actually kind of early game, or at least like flat, I think it's probably pretty reasonable. And so, hey, R is buffed rank 1 and 2, and base AD is skewed towards level 1, of course. And so its buffs that slightly flatten out Zeri a little bit, not by a ton, of course, but a little bit, I think is unidirectionally pretty good. Illaoi is getting the update because of terrain changes. Finally had the time to go in and dig in and do stuff. So the overall range on Illaoi Tentacles is up. It's hard to know exactly how much power it's going to be, of course. It could be that we over or undershoot this. But it's getting paired with a generically roughly minus 10% damage. This is both the base damage and the AD ratio on Q are both down about 10%. So about 10% less damage on Tentacles. To compensate, of course, for the big tentacle range and the fact that our win rate is currently quite good. If Illaoi goes sub 50, we probably buffer. If we get it wrong, are bad, but roughly the world we're in. Nidalee, we updated her rec items to recommend Lichbane. We are incrementally increasing the Lichbane pick rate on her. It is still her best first item. People are slowly moving over that way, but she's not really getting more powerful. People are kind of bad at Nidalee. On average, obviously in Elite, she's kind of fine. She's not great, but like she's much more okay in Master's hands than Silver hands, of course. And we're not going to fix that, right? That's not going to be what something that really happens here. But ultimately, yeah, we know we want to buff Nidalee. We want to buff for about 2% win rate. I guess another champion who could go build Rod of Ages. I'm not saying it's exciting on her, but like Rod of Ages and Rocket Belt are, I think, kind of reasonable on this champion. She goes into melee a fair bit, but looking at her overall stats, like she has a pretty appropriate amount of baseline durability when you look at like her health and overall stats. Like she's pretty normal if you compare to champs that go in and out. Like I'm looking at, a Rek'Sai kind of champion, or a like Karma, or like a Morgana or something, where it's like I'm ranged and I'm sometimes like kind of melee and then I'm ranged again. And it's like opportunistic champions shouldn't just be baseline really tanky, because they're very mobile and have ways of staying away very far. And so I don't think Nidalee can get much more baseline durable. A little bit maybe, but not by a lot. Her damage, of course, is quite high. Ultimately, I don't think there's an easy way to make her easier to play, and we're not really trying to do that, but trying to find out what parts of the kit can we like give her sort of durability on without just making her like almost unburstable. So one of these is really, really amping the healing on E. I think this ability is so far below the line. I think this ability like really, really sucks. And so it's pretty substantial buffs here on the base value and the ratio on the E. The attack speed on this button is going up a little bit here as well. And they're probably going to add one more thing to this. One suggestion I had was a little bit of magic resist growth, to have her match someone like Lilia or something, where it's like, yeah, you're mobile and kind of melee, and you're sort of in this world where you like should be able to survive a Syndra ult in a lot of cases because you have enough MR to not get one shot by like double pen builds, that kind of thing. So we'll see what it ends up being, but I think we're going to tack on one more line here than Nidalee. And again, the goal is about 2% win rate generically. This will make her pretty good in Elite, and that's just always going to be the case here. So Karma's an interesting situation here, where I think in isolation, Karma's win rates are fine. She's like a 49% win rate support. She's like a 49.8% win rate top laner, and like a 51% win rate mid laner. Those are very, very normal win rates for lots of champions. Zyra's are just higher in every role, basically, I think, right now. And Zyra's not a great example here. Regardless, like, Karma's win rates are fine. That said, players are also going to be okay with this level of power. So here's the weird thing, right? So it's like, okay, well, obviously we just buffed Karma. We buffed very, very hard. Obviously, they're really, really big buffs. That was intentional. And I wanted to say, hey, it's been years. How do players at large feel about roughly 50% win rate Karma? And if you look at ban rate, especially in high elo, it is like practically a straight line up. Not a ton of champions have more ban rate than pick rate, but Karma does in Diamond Plus. And ban rate tends to lag, so it's going to very quickly overshoot her pick rate by a lot. So, highly skilled players who play solo queue are like, this champ is Thanos. So, okay, we're going to act pretty early. We knew these were going to be pretty lofty buffs. And so what we're trying to do is lower Karma's power as a triple threat. To embrace Karma's primary role as support, I think is totally fine and totally reasonable. I think that is fine to do. I think Karma being a lane bully is actually probably a pretty good thing. Strategically, when people are playing marksman supports like Varus and Ashe or whatever, instead of like picking Heimerdinger or Karma, it makes me think that we just don't have any good lane bully supports. And I know players often don't like playing against lane bullies, but also I would much rather Karma and Heimerdinger and Zyra and Lux be the default lane bullies than Varus. Personally, I just think like the game is in a better state when that's the champs you're picking, because at least they make sense. So I think pretty strongly that we should, try to make sure that like highly skilled players, I'm not just saying pro, but like I'm just trying to say like highly skilled players should look at Karma, and maybe again, Heimerdinger is a pretty good example here of one that we could maybe bring back and say, these are the kind of champions that you would want to play if you're saying, I want a lot of pressure, I want to turbo push here, I just want lane control, and I'm going to pick some kind of a mage who is good at this and will fall off over time. Karma might be a little bit too skewed in this scenario. Willing to accept that we should maybe move around Karma's numbers a little here. But that is kind of the look. Anyway, the nerfs to Karma here are largely solo lane skewed. They are ranks 2, 3, 4 of her ultimate. She gets rank 1 for free, and AP ratio on the ultimate. Typical enchanter builds, keep in mind, the primary support item gives 0 ability power. On average, Karma players at support build Imperial Mandate more than they build Malignance. So AP ratio nerfs will disproportionately hit top and mid, where they are building Malignance Cosmic Drive every game, basically. And so, yeah, those probably dip Karma mid just below 50. It'll be a pretty meaningful nerf on paper. It's not going to be that much nerf in actual power, because all we're nerfing is the explosion on R plus Q, and not until level 6, and not until you build a couple of items. For the rest of it, basically. So this is not a huge amount of power down. Of course, it's powered down. Okay, fine. Brand was overbuffed in the previous patch. Some mix of this is his passive was doing too much damage. Some mix of this is people are building a lot more health because of the stat shard changes. And some of this is because now that the tick rate... now that it ticks for essentially longer, he is refreshing Liandry's and Ryle's for more time overall, and so those things are actually just doing more overall as items. So a pretty big swing here. Brand is clearly way too good in jungle. He is somewhat too good in support. And so basically going after the passive monster mod, the overall passive damage is getting hit yet again by making sure it's not actually doing more damage than the tooltip suggests. And then some flat damage off Q, which is specifically affecting his first jungle clear, because you learn Q at level 1 if you're jungling. And so trying to bring Brand jungle down to around 51. If we can. This might be under magnitude, in which case we might have to go again. Okay, fine. But a pretty hefty nerf to his jungle, and a moderate nerf to his support as well, since passive damage just always does matter. His Q is going to be hit on champions at support a decent amount. It matters some. Talia, getting some damage on Q, getting some cooldown on E. She's just very weak in the new season. Buffing her up, plus Lost Chapter items getting better. Pyke is not doing too well with the new items either. So it's some base armor, it's some Q mana cost, it's some Q AD ratio, it's some move speed. I think it's the base move speed and lethality scaling on the W, and it's some damage on the E as well. Quite a lot of buffs here. A lot of small things individually, but quite a bit of win rate here to Pyke. Azir is a 50% win rate solo queue champion. That means he's clearly too good for how difficult to play this champion's supposed to be. Like, he's clearly overtuned if he has that win rate, because people just don't have the mastery on him. Just globalist, that's true. The big thing here with Azir is Fleet Footwork has finally taken over as his best rune. This has been very good on him for a long time. People didn't move over until 14.1, but it has catapulted his win rate. Azir is now much too safe of a laner. As a late-game primary carry threat, he should be able to be shut down in lane. He is now running Fleet Footwork kind of all the time. He just simply has too much regen for being a ranged champion with a dash backwards. So the regen is going down. Because we know he's running Fleet, he's not going to have relatively low regen. Okay, fine. Rengar is extremely too good in elite levels of play. High win rate, high ban rate. Base health goes down, and AD ratios on Q go down because snowballing less good, and especially for top lane Rengar, a better chance to fight back against him. He can't just stat check you, or there's going to be some matchups that can kill him one auto sooner, and this might give him some weaker matchups. Ziggs definitely was affected in the stat chart update that made him a clearly too good bot laner. Right now, I think we're under 1% delta between Ziggs mid and Ziggs bot. I don't mind Ziggs bot being reasonably good. If he's like 50 1.5 52 in bot, I think it's okay. If we have to continue to try to unskew this champion, we can, but like Ziggs 52 in bot lane is fine. Ziggs getting to 51 in mid, I think is very reasonable and something that I think is something he should be allowed to be. So we know that armor changes are a little bit bot lane skewed for Ziggs. The W change was basically not bot lane skewed at all. So this is basically reverting the changes from the last couple of patches here, where we were trying to find bot lane skewed levers. Again, the armor actually was, the W really wasn't. And again, I'm willing to eat some amount of bot lane skew here. I think it's okay. But hey, Ziggs, of course, is in a world where he has no armor shard, and his base armor being 18 makes him really, really bad into champions like Yasuo or Talon or Zed in the mid lane. Let's give him a, like, I'm trying to raise mage baseline armor up to like 21, 22 in a lot of cases, because I think that is reasonable when they're facing off against assassins. They no longer have access to easy armor. They have to buy a arm guard, which is, of course, not cheap. So, give him some baseline armor, because I think just like making sure he doesn't have really egregiously horrible matchups. And then also, just overall, Ziggs is a champion who used to build Seraphs and used to build Shadowflame, both of which had health on it. They don't anymore. However, Ziggs' overall baseline durability, like his stat profile, is appropriate for a artillery mage. So I wanted to give him not just damage this patch, but give him a kind of a durability outlet. Of course, some of that is armor, sure. But some of that is W cooldowns, so that he has an escape tool up more often. Still going to be expensive. It's going to cost him quite a bit of mana, but this tool is going to be up more often to use as a kind of escape. Maokai is getting quite a few changes here. Maokai is one of the champions who benefited the most with the new season. Number one, he already liked building Deadman's Plate back in the old season, and now he has better Deadman's Plate called Trailblazer, because it's a support skewed Deadman's Plate, which of course he is happy to build, but also he's no longer fighting against the mythics when he's building a legendary. So both those combined to Maokai just got way, way, way better relative to the other supports on first item. Also, he scales so hard of move speed, he really, really, really loves the new stat shards with the move speed buff there. And so Maokai is way too good at support. He is a balanced jungler, and he is a pretty good top laner. His pick rate went up some in top lane, so people have like discovered he's a pretty good top laner. He has some play rate there. I would like to preserve his top and jungle some. We might have to do work at some point if Maokai becomes omnipresent in jungle, to where we're not going to simply nerf him. We're going to like try to unpro skew Maokai. Like I mentioned earlier that I don't want us to balance around pro as much, and I still stand behind that. I don't want to balance around pro as much. I do want us to design around pro some, to say, oh, this champ is looking pro jailed. Let's fix the pro jailing. Let's not just nerf them and leave them at 47% win rate. So that's what I'm going to try to commit to over the near future. In general, that's kind of what I'm thinking, and I think we can do it. So I just kind of gave you that idea here. So regardless, Maokai, of course, is a pretty large champion pro player right now. He is relatively balanced in solo queue. If he remained a 50% present pro champion, 60% present pro champion, 50% win rate, that's fine. I wouldn't act on that in any like immediate urgency. Like we know tanks are useful in pro play, but would be willing to move things around a little bit to make sure that he could have like a little more breathing room at some point. Anyway. Regardless, it's a bunch of tweaks here. Average Phreak changes has 7 lines in it. So the goal here is to bring down Maokai support and roughly keep pace elsewhere. So the first change is Maokai's base mana regen is getting lower. As one of the only tanks who can actually burn through his mana pool by spamming saplings, base mana regen actually matters on him, and with the support items giving percent mana regen, he was one of the only tanks who actually cared about that stat output. Someone like Tarek just built a tier and didn't care anyway. There are then tweaks to the E, where we know support Maokai maxes W second and E last, so he never gets more than rank 1 in E right now, and its mana cost and cooldown increased in rank 1E, but they are both better at rank 5E. Now, Maokai Jungle maxes E second, and so this would be power neutral-ish on him. This is power negative strictly on Maokai support. This is power negative strictly on Maokai support. Next thing is the Q cost is going down, which only affects Maokai top. The Q cooldown is getting lowered, which really only affects Maokai jungle and a little bit of Maokai top, and is trying to compensate for the other nerfs. Our cooldown nerfed at rank 1, buffed at rank 3. Again, skews towards top and jungle. They gain more XP than Maokai support, but it's not going to affect pro play all that much overall. And the final change is reshaping the passive to make it more about gold income. One of the truisms I think that is here for pro play is that pro play jungle plays incredibly low econ, and solo queue jungle plays relatively high econ, at least relative to pro play. And so anytime I can income skew a pro jailed jungle tank, we give it solo queue power without giving it pro play power. And if we can get to the entire suite of jungle champions, if we can raise the entire floor of jungle champions to increase their gold scaling, to care more about how much they're farming, then we can nudge the game to be like, actually, there are no rels where all you can do is gank because farming doesn't matter. It actually, all of it is about how much can you get from your gold income. And then, oh, cool, pro jungle plays a little more selfishly. They get, they're not as camping of lanes. They're not as just second supports. It's not just about AD carry and mid. It's a little bit more about junglers and outplaying, because you can't just play a low econ jungle. They all need to play some econ. There's something there that I think is useful. Regardless, it's a very small nudge. We'll see how it goes. Zyra is a champion who also really, really won on systems changes. So Zyra support doesn't care about haste. And she really likes the new shape of Leandries. Flat health is useful. Zanzax is useful. And doesn't need mana because she has a support item. Zyra mid needs mana and wants haste to wave clear. New Leandries is much worse on her. She liked old Leandries more. This is basically saying, okay, Zyra support, just overall, by the way, is way too good on new Leandries. She's also way too good with new stat shards. With everyone having more health, she's just like burning everyone, is clearly too good. And so it is a lot of mana regen down. I don't know if it's going to be enough, but it's very meaningful. The break even here is like level 17 on just the regen, but the Q cost is going down. So depending on how much of your mana budget is casting Qs, this will mean less or more or whatever. It's worth noting, so Zyra support, right? Of course, they all were mana flow banned, but Zyra support has a percent increased mana regen from her support item. Zyra mid has flat increased mana regen from Doran's Ring, which means any regen cut affects Zyra support fully and affects Zyra mid much less because Doran's Ring exists. And of course, they all run mana flow ban, things like that. So depending on how these numbers line up, this might be powered on everywhere, might be powered up everywhere, but I'm hoping it is powered down in Zyra support, who just is too good. And it's not that I expect Zyra mid to become her primary role, but closing the gap on Zyra mid and Zyra jungle and making them relatively viable, and just Zyra support not being clearly the only viable role, is a good thing. And I'm happy to move some things around. The primary lever for actually making mid and jungle better is substantially increasing the seed refund when you last hit a minion or monster, so that you can have more manual seeds to cast more plants as a laner, because of course you last hit there, and so the roles where she last hits, very obvious last hitting buff here. There is a kit update to Yorick to make sure that fighter builds are relatively successful. So this is the healing on the Q is now going to scale off missing health. So there's a just flat health scaler here. With some other stuff being moved around. Overall cast time on E getting shorter, so just a stronger spell, period. R will no longer have a lockout, but the damage per... so what this is when Maiden hits something, then Yorick can hit something, it's going to do percent max health damage. That damage is getting brought down, but there's no longer going to be a... like 2 or whatever second lockout. So if Yorick gets attack speed, aka Trinity Force, Stride Breaker, things like that, that will scale linearly with the passive, and so he gets functionally on hit damage while Maiden's active. And then passive range is getting shrunk down. It's basically like ghouls will react to him moving a little bit more quickly, and they'll follow a little bit better. There's a moderate kit update to Aurelion Soul. Basically, the stacks are getting moved from E executing large monsters, large minions, and champions, getting moved into if you can land Q burst on an enemy champion. So a lot more of Aurelion Soul's stacking gameplay is around fighting enemy champions and less about just sitting in lane and getting cannons. The overall mana cost on both Q and W are going down to make it much more likely you can go ahead and go for WQ strafing runs and fight enemy champions. A pretty substantial early game buff here as well. Right now, Aurelion Soul is an extremely late game scaler with a very bad early game. This gives him a bit more room to say, well, if you have a good matchup, you can go for strafes and go for some damage here. And then the actual just additive damage of W to say that actually this is worth casting. And it's actually worth pointing out, by the way, Aurelion Soul players, you should be maxing W second and going for more frequent like WQ strafe runs. That is actually where a lot of his power is. There's a lot of power in maxing W second and playing that way. There's a small set of changes to Shaco here as well. Shaco essentially is fine in support, but too good in the jungle. So flooring his mana regen growth to have it just be low. Again, support skewed output here. Of course, jungle is his primary role, so he's not going to care here. You get a ton of flat mana regen from the jungle item. Moving some W costs around, basically, if you were to max your W, the mana cost now goes down with rank. So W max Shaco has fewer mana costs to concern himself with, as well as some flat damage increase on the monster mod on W. So a clear speed buff. E mana cost is being increased, so if you're spamming E in lane, right, this is another like Shaco support thing, and then a lot of really interesting stuff around clones. So my understanding is, I think this got added before, where if you like cast a box, Shaco will cast a box. If you cast E, he'll cast a fake E. Now I believe it's if you snap your clone back because of getting out of range, it will play the animation of deceive, which is really cool. So now if you snap your R, it's going to play the deceive effects. So it's just like you actually pressed Q. It won't fool everybody, but like really cool change. And that's been the rest of the patch. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.